When you need a trusted livestock partner to ensure you are maximizing your profit and minimizing your risk, and you have the financing you need, United Producers is here. With a network of livestock marketing options throughout the Midwest, comprehensive risk management services, and competitive rates and flexible terms for financing, United Producers has the solutions you need. We are here to customize products and services to help your farm succeed. So call or click today to learn more about United Producers.
Hello, I'm Chris Teutsch, Forage Extension Specialist located in Western Kentucky at the University of Kentucky Research and Education Center near Princeton, Kentucky. And the topic I'm going to be talking on today is hay quality in Kentucky, a historical perspective. I've got two things that I'd like to cover today. The first is just an overview of hay sampling. Getting a good sample is absolutely paramount to getting good forage test results. So we're going to just go over how to get a good sample. And then we're going to take a look at 14,000 hay sample results from the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, and I'll have those summarized for you. So let's start out with hay sampling. And our goal of hay sampling is to get a sample that represents the hay that we're going to be feeding to our livestock. This is absolutely essential because the results of the forage test are only going to be as good as the hay sample that you submitted. So it's absolutely critical that we get a good uniform sample that's representing the different hay lots on our particular farm. And that's going to allow us to take that forage, supplement it if needed, and then feed it accordingly. Maybe we'll feed the higher quality hay when the animals have higher nutritional requirements. So the first thing to remember is that we should always sample each hay lot separately. And what a hay lot is a single cutting from the same field. So I have field A, first cutting, that's one hay lot. I could have field A, second cutting, that's a second hay lot. Or I could have field B, first cutting, that would be a third hay lot. So we want to sample each hay lot separately. We always want to use a properly maintained hay probe to collect samples. Simply sticking your hand in a bale and pulling a handful of hay out is not an adequate way to get a representative sample of your hay. So you have to use a properly maintained hay probe. And by properly maintained, what I mean is sharp. We want to be good and sharp so it cuts through the bale. It's not pushing things aside, but actually cutting through them. So it's important that we keep our hay probes good and sharp. And we want the length of our hay probe to be at least 16 to 18 inches long. We don't want to get much shorter than that. We want to be able to get in and get a good sample of what's inside of that bale. We want to collect at least 20 cores per hay lot. So for example, if I had a hay lot, remember a hay lot is that single cutting from a field. Say I got 100 bales off of that hay lot. I would want to go through and sample every fifth bale. 5 times 20 would be 100. And that's going to give me a good representative sample of that hay lot. Now when we sample round bales and square bales, we sample from different places. On a round bale, we'll sample from the side of the bale, as you can see in this photograph right here. On a large square bale or a small square bale, we'll sample from the end of the bale and probe inside of the bale. One important thing to remember, and sometimes people make this mistake, is that we want to submit the entire sample that we took. We do not want to subdivide those sample cores. And the reason for that is if you look at this particular photograph, all the small particles have migrated to the bottom of this bag. the small particles are associated with the most nutritious part of that sample. So the leaves, say from a clover or an alfalfa plant, or even from a grass plant, those smaller particles at the bottom of that bag, if I reach in there and I grab a handful of forage, what I'm going to be getting is these larger, more coarse pieces of stem and larger leaves. And that's really going to alter the outcome of my forage test results. So I want to make sure that I submit that entire sample, let the lab grind that entire sample, and then once it's into a homogeneous grind, they can subdivide it and get a good representative sample of the sample that you sent in. So I don't have time today to go over everything, but we do have a brand new hay sampling publication, and it's AGR 257. You can find it by simply Googling hay sampling, University of Kentucky, AGR 257, or by going to our Forages website. Just Google UKY Forages, it'll bring up our Forages website. The other resource that I wanted to draw your attention to was a brand new video on our KY Forages YouTube channel. If you want to find this video, all you need to do is simply Google KY Forages YouTube, and it'll bring up our webpage, and it should be the video near the top of the list. Okay, let's jump right into the sample set that we're going to be talking about today. And I want to tell you a little bit about the sample set and then the way I analyze that sample set. So Kim Fields at the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, and she's in charge of the hay testing program, was nice enough to provide a sample set of 14,067 samples, and they ranged from a time period of 2007 to 2017, so about a 10-year period. And there are a number of different hay types in there. And those hay types, of course, when you submit a sample, you have to write down what hay type it is. They're what I call self-described. That means they may be different than what I would consider, say, for example, a grass-clover mixture. I'd like to see 20 or 30% clover on a dry matter base in a grass-clover mixture. A lot of times people will put down grass-clover mixture if they've got 3 clover plants in a 10-acre field. So it's not a objective description, but more of a subjective description. It's important to remember that. The first thing I did with these 14,000 samples is I went through them, and I deleted what I considered outliers, and these are the criteria that I use for outliers. If a sample is less than 5% crude protein or greater than 30, it doesn't really fit what I consider a typical forage sample, so I deleted it. Same thing with acid detergent fiber, less than 20 or greater than 55, I delete it. Same thing with neutral detergent fiber. And we'll talk about what these are in just a couple slides. If it was less than 40 or greater than 75, I delete it from the sample set. And the reason you do that is you don't want extreme samples to influence the average of the sample set. And then I regrouped the samples, and I grouped them into the following categories. There was more categories that I kind of put together into some of these individual categories that I defined here. And they're alfalfa grass, and then we've got a grass, a clover grass, small grain annual ryegrass, so that kind of covers our winter annual grasses. And then I've got last category is warm season grasses. And that includes introduced warm season grasses like crabgrass and Bermuda grass and sorghum Sudan grass, and native warm season grasses like blue stem or Indian grass or switchgrass. And then I predicted total digestible nutrients. So I did not use the value from Kentucky Department of Agriculture because I feel like for grass samples especially, their equation is under predicting the energy in the hay samples. So I used a Virginia Tech equation that's kind of in the middle of the road. There's a whole bunch of different total digestible nutrient equations out there, or energy equations. And I chose one that was kind of in the center that I was familiar with. And then I went through and calculated summary statistics for about 10,000 samples that were remaining. And they included sample number, the minimum value, the maximum value, the average, the median. The median is very similar to the average, except it's less affected by values on either end of the spectrum. And then standard deviation, that tells us how much variation there was within the sample set. Now, one thing that I need to mention here, and this is not a fault of the Kentucky Department of Agriculture sample set, but it's the same for a sample set from any laboratory. The sample set is likely going to be skewed towards better quality hay samples. And what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is that the people who took the time to take a hay sample, to pay for it, to send it into the Kentucky Department of Agriculture for analysis, they're going to be your better forage and livestock producers. And what that means is that we're already getting a sample set that's going to be on the high end of forage quality versus the guys that really have never submitted a forage sample that are going to be on the lower end. So this data set tends to be skewed towards the better hay quality samples in the state. Nothing you can do about that. The only way we could get a really representative sample was if we randomly selected cattle operations in the Commonwealth and then went out and sampled them. And then that would give us a feel for both the better quality producers and the producers that have lower hay quality. So let's jump into the analysis, and this is from the Kentucky Department of Agriculture hay testing program, and this is crude protein. So this first line is the number of samples, and these are going to be the same for each table that I'm going to show. This is the minimum value, the maximum value for crude protein. So the highest one, the lowest one, the average, and then the medium, which is very similar to average but less impacted by extremes on either end, and then the standard deviation. So when we balance a ration for an animal, and Jeff Limcooler is going to be talking about this in the next presentation, we basically balance it for crude protein and energy, or total digestible nutrients, for beef cattle. And this is just showing the crude protein requirement, since we're looking at crude protein for different cattle classes. For example, a beef cow that's lactating, so she had a calf and she's lactating, she's going to need somewhere between 10 and 12% crude protein. A dry cow that's in mid-gestation, she's going to need, somewhere closer to 7% crude protein. So let's take a look at the average crude protein. And I think everybody knows what an average is, but a good explanation of an average is the three ag economists that went duck hunting. So they're in their blind, a duck flies over, the first ag economist shoots at it, and he goes in front of it. The second one shoots and goes behind it. And the third ag economist yells, "We got it." That's what an average is. So average is far from perfect, and you can't balance a ration off an average. That's the point that I want you to take home today. You cannot balance your ration off of an average. You have to have a hay test for your particular hay lot. So the average, as you would expect, if we look at alfalfa and alfalfa grass mixtures, these are guys growing these are going to be good forage producers who are doing a good job managing their forages for the most part. They have a range in average crude protein of around 16.5 to around 20%, and sometimes higher depending on the particular sample. Now, if we jump here to grass and grass clover, here are our last four categories: warm season grasses, these are cool season annuals, clover grass mixes, and grasses. We're going to be bouncing around 11 to 12% for crude protein, which is still pretty phenomenal when you think about a grass hay sample. That's going to meet the requirements of a lactating brood cow in most cases. And generally speaking, when we talk about deficiencies in forage systems, sometimes we'll have a crude protein deficiency, but a lot of times we're going to have energy deficiencies in forage systems, more often than crude protein. Now, it's important to remember that there's bad samples in every category. And you're saying, how in the world could you grow alfalfa hay that's 7.5% in crude protein? Well, maybe it rained for 6 weeks straight and we went way past early bloom into seed pod formation, so the quality is going to be very low. And then on top of that, I had a leafhopper infestation, which is going to reduce leaf quality. And then I cut it, and then it rained for 2 weeks. So all of a sudden, I've got nothing left but stems. I'm going to have a very low crude protein concentration. That holds true for all of these different categories. So again, it's very important to know the forage quality of each particular hay lot so that you can supplement accordingly. This is next parameter we're looking at is neutral detergent fiber. And neutral detergent fiber, if you look down here, is what's left over after we digest that forage sample in a neutral detergent solution. This is also called Van Soest analysis, which includes neutral detergent and acid detergent fiber. And after we just digest it in this neutral detergent solution, what we have left is cell wall, the cell wall constituents, which includes hemicellulose, cellulose, and lignin, and then some fiber-bound minerals. And the reason that this is important to us is that neutral detergent fiber is related to dry matter intake. So as neutral detergent fiber increases, the amount of forage or the dry matter intake of the animal decreases. So we will use this in our cow-calf hay supplementation tool that Jeff Lemkohler will talk a little bit about. So that's important to know this particular value of neutral detergent fiber. Generally speaking, the crude formula that's used to determine dry matter intake is 120 divided by the neutral detergent fiber. It's a crude estimation, but it's about as good as we're going to get. So for example, if we had a 60% NDF, we would take 120 divided by 60 and it will come out to 2% of the body weight. So that means a 1,200 pound animal could eat 2% of her body weight in forage. So if we look at the average neutral detergent fiber, we're going to see, of course, if we look at alfalfa and alfalfa grass, it's considerably lower. And that's one of the advantages of legumes, and in particular alfalfa and alfalfa grass mixtures, is that it has lower NDF. So what's that mean in terms of feeding that forage material? That means that material is going to move through that animal at a greater rate. So we're going to be able to get more forage moving through that animal versus something that has in the low to mid 60s in terms of NDF on average, which would be our grass species. And again, you know, just because we have good average values, we can have bad hay samples too, which have very high levels of neutral detergent fiber, which is going to limit dry matter intake. So just think about this for 1 minute. I've got a low quality hay, and I've got a really high NDF on that hay. So it's kind of like a double whammy on the animal. The animal needs more nutrition than that hay can provide, and it just can't eat enough of that hay to get that nutrition. So this is acid detergent fiber, and this is kind of related a little bit more to digestibility of that forage. So what we do is we take that forage material and we dissolve it in what we call an acid detergent solution. And that acid detergent solution leaves us with cellulose and lignin. And that's a cell wall constituents minus hemicellulose. We commonly use this to calculate energy in the forage sample. So when I calculate total digestible nutrients that will be based off of acid detergent fiber. And that's why I'm showing you this. So if we look at the average, again, alfalfa and alfalfa grass mixtures are going to tend to be lower, and legumes will tend to be lower in overall, but not as low as NDF. And then we've got our average 40% NDF for these thousands of samples that we analyzed in this data set. Now it's really important to remember that we again can get high values of ADF also, which means that they're going to be less digestible, generally speaking. When we're talking about fiber, higher levels of fiber are not good in the animal. Let's move on to total digestible nutrients. So I said earlier that when we balance a ration, we balance for two things in most cases, and that's crude protein concentration and total digestible nutrients or energy in that ration. And down here on the table is the energy requirements of different classes of beef cattle. So for example, a dry cow would only need 50% total digestible nutrients to maintain body condition, but a lactating brood cow would need about 20% more or 60% total digestible nutrients to maintain her body condition score. So the average for this sample, if we look at total digestible nutrients, and again, total digestible nutrients represents the amount of that sample that can be digested by the animal. And it's going to be higher, as you would expect, for alfalfa and alfalfa grass mixtures, and the higher the value, the better. Grasses are right in the mid-50s for total digestible nutrients. And remember, just like any other forage sample, they can be either very good, this maximum value in the 60 to 70%, or it can be pretty bad. If it's mature and has gotten rained on, the total digestible nutrients are going to tend to be less. So to kind of summarize things, I want to talk just a little bit about the percentage of samples meeting the energy requirements of various animal classes. And we're going to focus in on grass and grass clover mixtures for this particular data set. So when we start here at the bottom, we look at a dry cow mid-gestation. So that's going to be the lowest nutrient requirement. 80% of the hay samples in this large data set that we analyzed from the Kentucky Department of Agriculture for grass and grass clover samples are going to meet the nutrient requirement, the energy requirements for that cow in mid-gestation. That quickly drops to around 40% for a cow in late gestation. So as that cow's nearing calving, her nutrient requirements are going to start to ramp up. So 40% of the samples. When we get to a lactating cow, so that's a cow that's had a calf, she's actively lactating, and that's when her energy requirement is going to be the highest. Only 12% of those samples will meet her requirements. Think about it, that's about 1 out of every 10 samples, hay samples, will meet the requirements of a lactating cow. It's important to know what your forage quality is because this is really a critical period during the production cycle for a beef cow, and we need to make sure we supplement them accordingly so that they don't lose condition during lactation. And then when we talk about this last class, and that's growing animals, it's going to be very difficult to meet their nutrient requirements and have a reasonable rate of gain with just grass hay. The last graph I want to show you is kind of just my categories for hay, and I kind of based them off of total digestible nutrients. I've got really bad to really good hay samples. And I made this graph because I wanted to tell you that I don't expect to move everyone from really bad hay to really good hay. That's not even a reasonable expectation. But look, if I can just move you from really bad hay to bad hay, or maybe really bad hay to okay hay by just a few simple things that you learned tonight, then we've really done something. And that should be your goal. If I can move you to that okay hay, we're going to limit the amount of supplementation we need. That's going to cut our supplementation costs significantly. And it's going to leave our animals in better condition coming out of winter. And that's super important in a cow-calf operation because body condition score is so closely related to reproductive efficiency in beef cattle herds. Last thing I want to mention is that whether you're buying or selling hay, knowing the weight of a hay bale is really important. It's going to allow you to plan. It's going to allow you to offer your hay for a reasonable price. And it's also going to allow you to buy hay and make sure that you're getting a decent deal when you buy that hay. It's also going to let you determine the needs. We can count bales. It's much harder to estimate the weight of the bale if we haven't weighed a few. So if we know the weight, we can count the number of bales and make sure that we've got enough hay for the winter. It's also going to let us determine or roughly determine intake. So if we know how much a bale weighs and how many days it's taking to eat that bale, then we can get an idea of how much those animals are eating. And we can also use it to determine feeding losses, depending on our feeding system. All right, that's all I've got. I'm happy to answer any questions or entertain any discussion that you all might have.